Let me. Okay, Edu.
So it's with great pleasure that I open this seminar of the joint seminar of the Department of Political Science and the Center for Metropolitan Studies. I am Eduardo Marques, the director of the Center for Metropolitan Studies and a professor at the department. And we have the pleasure and honor to have here with us today Professor Sebastian Mazzuca, who is professor at Johns Hopkins, the Department of Political Science at Johns Hopkins in the USA, and had a long trajectory of formation in Berkeley, at the University of California, Berkeley. Then was a postdoc fellow at Harvard University, and then Johns Hopkins. He has been producing very interesting work on the formation on politics in Latin America, but more specifically related to the topic we are going to discuss today, to the formation of the state in the region, trying to specify for the region theories of state formation that were produced in the context of this is a fact of the virtual thing. You're going to see a cat going around, and we cannot discipline a cat. And he has been doing brilliant work on the formation of the state in Latin America, and how the processes of formation of the state in the region differ from the ones in Europe, especially, that were the data from which the existing theories were produced, showing the specificities of the process of state formation, and with very lasting consequences to the political systems, the formats of the state, and the democracies, and the problems of the democracies that we live in Latin America. So it's really a pleasure to have you here, and I give you the screen.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Really the pleasure and the honor is mine. I've admired Brazilian political science in general for a long time. I've used it, and I feel like half brother of you guys. So I'm really happy to be here. Let me share the screen, which is something you've never heard of, and that word that I will share the screen. Okay. Okay, are you able to see the screen?
Yes, perfectly.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, but
okay, so let me. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good, great. So I'm going to talk about this book. This book is a long book, and it has a lot of 19th century stuff in it. So but we are worried about the present, not about the past in political science. So I need to justify why I look at the 19th century with so much interest and with so much intensity, I would say. So there's my usual way of justifying it is that there's a sort of companion book to this, which I wrote with Jerry Monk, that talks about the low quality of Latin American democracies, and actually says that the low quality of Latin American democracies, Brazil is suffering a lot right now about it. The low quality of institutions in Latin America is actually an interaction, a trap between low capacity states and low quality democracies, and that they reinforce each other. And in this little book, we sort of provide some measures of it and some ideas of trajectories and causal mechanisms, okay? But this is the first time I'm teaching, I am sharing my presentation of the book after this special report from The Economist that I think maybe you're aware of it. It was published last week, and it's a very interesting, given the audience, it's a very interesting report, one of the best ones I've read from The Economist about Latin America. It has its usual, obviously there's plenty of things that are not there, it's incomplete, but still, given the space, I think is either very good or excellent. And then in sort of, they build a causal chain in which society is changing, the economy is stagnant in general in Latin America, but then, and democracy is at risk or it's backsliding and things like that. So all those things, but then at some point in the special report and in what I think is the core article there, the core piece is made out of 5 pieces. They come up with this statement, which is state weakness is the single most important source of Latin America's chronic problems, which they were very generous and they quoted me. I mean, they highlighted this in the report, but it's a quotation from my book. So this, and actually in the report, my book is super well summarized. So I don't know really what to do now, because The Economist made a better presentation of my book than I can do myself. So I changed the presentation a little bit to make it more interesting and not to be redundant in relation to the summary that The Economist already is producing, or the Foreign Affairs has already provided a good summary. So I will try to say something interesting. So I apologize if you read the Economist report. You sort of, on the one hand, know that these topics are current and that they matter for present days issues, but on the other hand, I mean, I don't know if I'm going to be as efficient or as entertaining as The Economist was. Okay, so let me get started. Let me skip this. It's the story of Robin Hood and the Sheriff of Nottingham. Let me skip this altogether. If we have time, I'll come back to them. I promise. This will tell you whether you're a Bavarian or a Marxist, or whether you should be in political science or sociology, and whether you like state formation or not. But let's skip that. Let me go to the main thing. Okay. Let me get started right now. The book is based. This book, which is about 19th century and its impact on current affairs and the current structural issues, state weakness, low state capacity, is based on one conceptual distinction that I find fundamental, even though it has not been made. I think it's crucial to make it, is the conceptual distinction between state formation and state building. It seems that I am playing with words, but far from it. I'm not playing with words. These are different objects. No, I don't care really how you call them, but these are different things, and it's very important to separate them out. State formation, on the one hand, involves 2 processes, which is territory consolidation and violence monopolization. These 2 processes are a wonderful thing to study. Is equivalent, I think, to country creation, to the idea of a country is created when there's a territory and there's a monopoly of violence on top of it. Is a very minimalist Bavarian definition. So if a state is a monopoly of violence over a territory, then state formation is the formation of the territory and the monopolization of violence within it, okay? And even though people use state formation and state building interchangeably, I want to make a very strong distinction, because state building is not about territory consolidation or violence monopolization. It's about the extinction of patrimonialism, the creation of bureaucratic capabilities, what Michael Mann called infrastructural power. We can go into the definition of that later on if you want. I love to discuss these conceptual issues. But it's this idea of a state that has an administration, a permanent administration, a civil service that is capable of providing public goods in an efficient manner and in an even manner across the territory. That is state building. State building is not public goods themselves, but the capacity to provide public goods in an efficient and even manner. Different from state formation. State formation is just country creation. The creation of a territory, territory consolidation, and violence monopolization. Let me stop here and double check that you're listening to me. Can you anyone raise a hand if they're okay?
Yes, it's okay. Perfect.
Okay, good. Because this is not my house. I'm on tour and I don't know if internet is working properly. So okay, somehow you will let me know if there's any problem. Okay, so these are two different processes. This is the key conceptual distinction in my book. It actually, the book is built on that. So if you get this, you get half of the book or half of the first part of the book, really. So one thing is to create a country, another thing is to build capacities in that country. And this distinction is super important for me because it allows me to make what I think is the key question, really the key question of Weberian political science, of comparative historical analysis, I would say. And the key question is, under what conditions are the processes of state formation and state building, when are they coupled, when are decoupled, or when they become incompatible? That is, when do they go to, under what conditions they go together, under what conditions they don't go together, you get one but not the other, and then what conditions state formation becomes incompatible with state building. There are many logical possibilities here, I'm just mentioning a few. And so, but then the conceptual separation of state formation and state building allows for this research agenda, which is when do the two things go together in a virtuous circles, when they become incompatible, so on and so forth. Okay, so here is really, I think, the secret of this research agenda. Think about state development or whatever, state making as two separate dimensions, state formation and state building. We've already seen that, I'm just repeating. I am disaggregating state formation into two components: violence monopolization and territory consolidation, right? I hope you can see that I'm moving the cursor here. And then state building is the transition from patrimonial rule to bureaucratic administration, understood in Weberian or Mannian terms, whatever. In territory consolidation, so this is the link between one and the other, the conceptual link between one and the other. When you do territory, when territory consolidation occurs, always and everywhere, there's a center of political power where the monopoly of violence resides, essentially. And that center incorporates a periphery. That's what territory consolidation is about, the incorporation of a periphery. And the question then, the specific question of the book is, under what condition the incorporation of a periphery by a center is accompanied, goes hand in hand with periphery transformation? Because a center can incorporate the periphery with or without transformation. If there is periphery transformation, then there's state capacity. If there's no periphery transformation, there's a convalidation of local political tradition in the peripheries, then the the potential for capacity buildings is very low. And then as ultimately for the provision of public goods in an even and efficient fashion. Okay, so this is really the key conceptual thing, and the focus is on this arrow. When is territory consolidation is periphery incorporation. Periphery incorporation, when does it occur? Under what conditions does it occur? Sorry, with periphery transformation. Okay. So there's a beautiful answer in the literature, very deep, going back to Weber or even before Weber and Hintze, but even before them, you have some many writers, actually, especially English writers, believe it or not, who have thought about this a lot. And the idea coming from Europe is that when you form a state, you actually create capacity. That's the thing in Europe. We have a theory based in Europe in which state formation and state building are actually not distinguished because there's no need to distinguish them. The states that were formed in Europe were capable states. So state formation and state building occurred at the same time. And you could not have had state formation without state building and vice versa in Europe. And we all know very well what all this is about. It's the Tilly story. Tilly in a way stylizes a set of facts and theories that happened before him and makes them very, very pleasant to read and very engaging and very ungeneralizable to some extent. And it's this history of essentially starting in 1618 with the 30 Years' War, two or more centuries, two centuries or longer of intense geopolitical competition among monarchs, proto-monarchs, princes, dukes, and all kinds of stuff. And that 30 Years' War was really a critical juncture in the emergence of Europe and the emergence of the modern state. Before, nothing like that existed. The emergence of the modern state. And what we see there is really a Darwinian logic. Why does state formation and state building go hand in hand in Europe? This is the French. Here we have the French army. It's an illustration of the French army's intervention in the 30 Years' War. It was abstaining when it intervened. Geopolitical competition escalated to the entire continent, and that is a very intense episode of geopolitical competition, of war, in which you see the central causal chain of state formation in Europe, which is enhanced geopolitical competition forces technological innovations in the art of war, a number of technological innovations, the traces italiennes, some forms of defense, some forms of organization, like a permanent army. The details are beautiful to be read, are very well documented. There's a causal change in which enhanced geopolitical competition drives military innovation, and military innovation demands essentially a substantially new level of extraction, of taxation. And taxation in turn creates all kinds of capabilities for the state. That is why I liked the Sheriff of Nottingham better than Robin Hood, because the Sheriff of Nottingham was a state builder, was collecting taxes to build a state. And so we have that, and so we have geopolitical competition, military innovation, a new round of geopolitical competition at a higher level. And ultimately, the real innovation in that process is the modern European state. The modern territorial state is really the technological innovation, the ultimate technological innovation in those 2 centuries of intense, ongoing, permanent state of war or preparation for war, which is essentially the same thing. And so this is the picture in Europe, is the Tillian picture in Europe: states made war, war made states. There are some arguments now that are introducing a number of caveats to that literature, but we don't need to consider them here. And then we have this story of in Europe, and then we have a number of wonderful monographs on other regions. And essentially all these other books, and I'm just here quoting, I'm just here showing the most, what I find the most brilliant ones. So Herb's book on Africa, State and Power in Africa, or Karen Barkey on the Ottoman Empire with bandits and bureaucrats, and then Centenos on Blood and Death in Latin America. All this work essentially say Tilly does not apply. Tilly does not apply to any of these regions. Here things are different, either because of population density, either because land is abundant and labor is scarce, either because there's a tribal organization that is nomadic and doesn't settle, or like in Centeno, because wars are not really intense enough to create strong states. And then, okay, so there are a number of caveats that say, well, Tilly doesn't apply to these other regions. And I'm very unhappy with that. I'm very happy with these works, but I'm very unhappy, and we should all be unhappy with the fact that the aggregate result of this is not a general claiming to have a general theory is not possible right now, given the state of the knowledge, but militating against a general theory, creating a theory that's ad hoc, idiosyncratic every time is not going to lead us anywhere. We need to theorize in a way that's cumulable, that's transferable, that can travel. That's my point of view. Not, I would say, my religion, but that would be pretty contradictory. Okay, so let me quote this guy, who is a very smart guy, and you've heard about him probably. And I'm the opposite of being a proud Argentine. I'm not. I mean, I like Argentina a lot, but I'm not proud about many of its things. It just happened that here an Argentine author is very is very insightful for what happens with the literature. So the point is that we have Tilly for Europe. It's a great piece of work, and then we have all other theories about other regions. Says Tilly does not apply, then something else happens. Okay, so this reminds me of this thing, which is a quote from Borges, Jorge Luis Borges, and this kinds is this, according to Borges, there's a Chinese encyclopedia which is called the Celestial Emporium of Benevolent Knowledge, and that encyclopedia contains a typology. And the typology, look at this typology, please pay attention because it's very funny. In its remote pages, it is written that the animals, so this is essentially a taxonomy of animals, according to this encyclopedia. In this remote, it's written that the animals are divided into, okay, so what are the animals? Well, those belonging to the emperor, then embalmed, then trained, then piglets, mermaids, fabulous, loose dogs, included in this classification, that shake like crazy, countless, drawn with a very fine camel hairbrush, etc., that have just broken the base, that look like flies from a distance. This is a completely crazy taxonomy classification, right? It's completely crazy. Why? Because essentially it doesn't meet the two criteria that categories in a taxonomy should be mutually exclusive. And this clearly, there's nothing like this here, because it can be embalmed and belonging to the emperor at the same time, or can be a piglet and belong to the emperor. So they are not mutually exclusive. It would be mutually exclusive. You say belonging to the emperor, not belonging to the emperor. That would be mutually exclusive. Here, there's nothing like that. And they are not collectively exhaustive. So there's no. I don't know. There may be some animals out there that, well, I guess they would all be here in this L category. Others. But I mean, it's a very rough, useless classification of animals. The same happens with the theories of state formation. Exactly the same thing. We have Tilly, and then we have a number of idiosyncratic theories with special causes, but that are different and that they region specific. That is the thing that I don't like, and the thing that, I mean, even though my book is on Latin America, I want to try to aim not to foreclose the possibility to have a general theory of state formation, in particular a theory of state formation that is able to answer the question on when the fundamental question, I think one of the most fundamental questions in political science, when a country forms, does its own state has capacities or not? Can governments rely on permanent capabilities in that country or not? And that is a fundamental question, okay? So I want to build a theory for that. And so that is general enough. So what I did is very basic. I tried to produce a taxonomy that is not like the celestial one, that like the Chinese one. And so I say, well, states are formed. Under what conditions are state forms? I want a taxonomy with categories that are mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. And given that there's no work on that so far, there's been no work, I started simple. So I say, well, under what conditions do states form? What are the relevant international parameters under which states can be formed? So I look at the basic things, the Marxist and the Bavarian side of the world. The international economy is one dimension. What a state is formed under what international economic conditions? That's question number one. Question number two is, what is the geopolitical context? What is the Waltzian context of state formation? And here I make after a very simple distinction, I make an another simple distinction, which is, well, the international economy can be feudalistic or capitalist, or capitalist, based on free trade or some form of mercantilism. So these are really two substantially different international economic contexts. And then I ask whether the geopolitical context is one of anarchy, where all states are about to have the same power, or there's a hierarchy in which there are a number of superpowers that sort of rule the world, so to speak. Let me check the time. Okay, I'm fine. So then we have, given this taxonomy, we have a typology with 4 quadrants. We could make it continuous and I don't know, and we could create other typologies, but at least this typology has the benefit that is, given its simplicity, we can check that the categories here are mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. And I created a 2x2 table, which is old school political science. By the way, I try to write current. I do state formation with state-of-the-art political science. I have an APSR paper on that with wonderful co-authors, but this is like more basic. And in that other paper, there's a continuum of the parameters are continuous. So okay, so here is just two binary variables, and by combining them, I have these 4 global contexts. So when there's anarchy and feudalism, right, we have pioneer state formation. This is the context in which Europe formed. And this context is one of war-led state formation. War drives state formation. States make war under anarchy, and feudalism, states make war and work makes states. And this is exactly the parameters under which Europe is formed, and essentially the parameters of state formation of Tilly's theories, or the Tilly stylization of Hinze-Weber's theories. On the opposite quadrant, you have, if you have some hybrid quadrants here in this diagonal, but the one that's opposite to this one is the one in which you have hierarchy, you have some superpower. So states are formed when some superpower already exists and sort of imposes the terms of ruling the world. So what's in IR is called regime makers. So you have some of those, and then the new states are going to be regime takers in a way. Strictly speaking, I would say. So, and then you have capitalism. So if you have hierarchy and capitalism, you're not doing pioneer state formation, you're doing latecomer state formation. Countries engage in latecomer state formation, and as opposed to war-led, they are based on trade. So trade drives the process of state formation. Commercial incentives rather than geopolitical pressures drive state formation. And if you look at the example of Africa, actually Africa, I will talk about just very briefly about the hierarchy dimension. Africa was created its own states when in the 1960s, independence of Africa, those states were created when there was a super hierarchy of states, in the sense that there was the US and the USSR, big superpowers, there was the UN, there were little geopolitical incentives. Actually, there was no war involved. There were revolutionary movements, but essentially you sent an application to the UN to become a country and you could become a country. So it's very easy latecomer state formation in a way for Africa, and in Latin America, somewhere in between. Okay, so so this is it. Now the question is whether was there state formation in Latin America. What does state formation look like in Latin America? And here I have a number of maps to illustrate and sort of, I don't want you to bore you too much, so let's look at maps. Maps are always interesting. And so was there state formation in Latin America? Was there territory consolidation? Was it a critical juncture? Was the formation of territories a critical juncture in Latin America? Were there alternative paths to be taken by these countries? The countries that we know of are part of are one path among multiple paths in the 19th century. And the answer is a very strong, solid yes. There is a ton of state formation understood in the way as I define it before, territory consolidation and violence monopolization. There's a ton of action there in the 19th century in Latin America, which all books on state building in Latin America have completely ignored. They just talk about state building as if countries already existed. They did not exist until very late. And so there was a ton of state formation in Latin America. Here, I'm looking at Mexico, which is a very important, is a very well-known case, so it's a standard case. And if you look at here, independent Mexico really looks different from Mexico today. So there was state formation. Unfortunately, and this is the history of Mexico, we know that Mexico lost half of its northern section to the US, including California, where I studied, and Texas to the US, among others. And then Mexico lost Central America. So Mexico shrunk. So there was territory consolidation, there was shrinkage. So the borders changed, and the territory was not consolidated until the mid-19th century. It was not an automatic transition from colony to state, to country. But this is the failure story. This is the path this is one path not taken in Mexican history. The preservation of the entire colonial unit, that did not happen. But there were also other paths not taken, and that's the bright side, in a way, of Mexican history. If we can talk about that later, whether it's bright or not. But there were for decades, there were secessionist movements in Mexico that could actually have effectively shrunk the Mexican empire even further, made it even smaller than it is today. And these are three well-known republics that could have remained independent. It's very interesting here to mention Yucatan. Yucatan was for 10 years an independent state and had all the rudiments to be an independent state. If Guatemala could be an independent state, Yucatan could have been a perfectly independent state. It had a wealthier economy. Its main partner was New Orleans, the main port of commercial exchange. It requested protection from Britain. It asked to become a state of the US. So there was a ton of action there. Even though Mexicans always cry about the loss of territory, they don't see that actually they consolidated territory that could have disaggregated. So there was territory consolidation. Mexico City made an effort to keep these guys together within the same state. And I'm here mentioning only a few, okay? This is the Brazilian case. I hope I didn't provoke allergies on you guys, or that this doesn't provoke allergies on you guys. But Brazil, which if you show that there was state formation in Brazil, I mean, the point is made, because the Brazilian state formation is the hardest one to prove, in a way, because really the Brazilian colonial unit, the Portuguese colonies in South America, remained almost intact into the independent period. So this is the myth of, not the myth, there was political stability in terms of regime, in many other, in terms of government, there was stability. But we know that in Brazil, there were substantial secessionist ventures, and Piratini is a huge one. 10 years, also an independent republic, and actually, we know that Uruguay was part of the empire, Brazilian Empire, the Cisplatina, and Piracini actually was much more viable as an independent state than Uruguay. However, it remained within it. Rio de Janeiro managed to keep it within the empire. It didn't manage to keep Uruguay, but Piratini was actually a bigger challenge than Uruguay. So there was state formation in Brazil. The same way that there was in Mexico, there was state formation in Brazil, not just in terms of consolidating a territory, aggregating potentially disparate, separate regions, okay? And then the story of Central America, this is sort of the opposite of Brazil. The Central American Confederation is a tiny country, as opposed to Brazil, that's a colossus, it's a huge country. Well, I'm talking to Brazilians, so you know this very, but Central America, we say, well, Central America, can the Central American Federation, which is a tiny country, be disaggregated? And it was disaggregated because after separation from Mexico, we know it became 5, 6 countries, depending on how you count Panama, the year, and other countries. And so there was separation even in mini republics like the Central American Confederation. So Central America had also a number of paths ahead of it. It could have been part of the Mexican Empire. It could have been a federation on its own. It eventually became 5 separate countries, but also, if there are many books that show that even in Guatemala, at the time the most important country, Guatemala itself, which is a micro country, could have disaggregated into 2 or 3. So then even in Guatemala there was state formation. I mean, separation from other region and then holding together a center and its own periphery. So there was state formation everywhere, even in Central America, Mexico, Brazil, and I show this for all countries. Let me just mention this last one, which I like very much. Is a country that it actually is the only political unit that was made up of territories from 3 different countries. And this would have been a pretty powerful country these days, which is the Liga de los Pueblos Libres, the Artigas project, part of Uruguay, part of Brazil, part of Argentina. And it existed for 10 years and informally for even longer. And when the Piratini Republic was an independent, there were attempts to revive this. So there was state formation in Latin America for sure, okay? Let me tell you what the theory is. So if there was state formation, now we can go back to the question, was there state building or not? There was state formation. Was it coupled or was it decoupled from state building? Did it create state capacity? Were these countries that were they consolidated their territories, did they create capacity or have they failed to create capacity? So this is the theory in a way. So the theory goes from the international conditions that are specific to Latin America, as Eduardo said, but specific in a systematic way, not specific in an ad hoc way. So we go from here, the initial conditions to the final outcome. And so this is sort of a causal chain. You would have to read it, or you have to read the book to see the full argument. So let me walk you through the causal argument. Okay, remember from the beginning, from one of the beginnings. Remember from here that we have these international conditions, and you can have war-led state formation or trade-led state formation as opposite polar types. So this was a few slides ago. Now we come back after proving that there was state formation in Latin America. So I claim essentially that there are 2 polar models of state formation with 2 opposite outcomes. And one is the one that we know from Tilly, which is war-led state formation. The other is trade-led state formation. So let's try to unfold the causal chain there. First, what are the initial conditions for the war-led state formation as opposed to trade-led? Well, the initial conditions, you already know, because that was one of the first slides, is geopolitical anarchy. There's no superpower. They're all fighting on equal footing, essentially. All the political units, all these monarchs, dukes and princes, they are fighting on an equal footing. And there's either feudalism or mercantilism. There's no free trade capitalism. In trade-led state formation, the conditions are the opposite. There's an international hierarchy. Starting in 1815, there's a very clear international hierarchy, and we can put a proper name now into it, which is Great Britain. That's the period of the Pax Britannica. And the Pax Britannica is a period based on a hierarchy, on the existence of the British Empire, which is a very vegetarian form of empire because it doesn't want to conquer the world. I'm simplifying too much, but it promotes free capitalism, right? It promotes free trade capitalism. It wants to trade more than to invade in general, and especially in Latin America. So given these initial conditions, one can ask, well, what is the goal and the priorities of, what are the goals and priorities of the state makers, of those who create the countries? Well, in Europe, in the war-led state formation period, here I don't have any proper names, as you can see, but we know that the empirical reference here is Europe. The priorities in war-led state formation is political survival through war making. If you are not a good warrior, if you're not a warring state with military capabilities and the fiscal capabilities that are needed to have a competitive army, then you won't survive. In the cases of trade-led state formation, also political survival is at stake, but political survival, which is the goal of every politician, political survival occurs when there's market making, in the sense that when the conditions are created for an emerging country to export whatever it has to export, because that's where revenues come from to create the state. And so here is where this issue comes. So, okay, so if that is the goal and the priority, what are the tools, the means to achieve the goal of political survival? And we know that in the war-led state formation process, the resources is internal taxation. So you are under external threat, and external threat drives internal taxation. In the case of trade-led state formation, money comes from the custom houses, from international trade. You export stuff, you import stuff, you usually tax imports, so you tax the middle class, not the exporting oligarchies, and you get the money to build states that way. And if you are able to have a vibrant, dynamic export sector, then you're going to get a ton of revenues. And that's the money that built the Latin American, that builds the trade-led state formation states, which are the Latin American or Latecomer states. Now, the key question is, what is the strategy in these two contexts toward the periphery? Remember that periphery incorporation was the key in this whole argument. In war-led state formation, when a center incorporates the periphery, it incorporates it with transformation. It has to change the periphery in order to make it fiscally viable. By contrast, in the trade-led state formation process, periphery incorporation occurs without transformation. Why is that? Well, first, because there's not much money in Latin American periphery, so why bother? And second, because if you want to initiate money extraction, resource extraction in peripheries, then if you do that, then there's going to be contestation and conflict. And conflict dissuades foreign investments and dissuades and blocks foreign international trade. So it's counterproductive. Actually, in Latin America, it's counterproductive to do periphery incorporation during the period of state formation. So then that is what decouples state formation from state building in Latin America. The final outcome is when the peripheries are transformed, strong states in Europe and weak states in Latin America. Okay? So that is the argument of I think, the first part of the book. So let me summarize it. So there are two processes, war-led, trade-led. The war-led is created the European pioneers, the trade-led, the latecomer Latin Americans. If I were to talk about the second part of the book, I would talk about not the contrast in the second part of the book, which is the longest, and that is the part that no one will ever read. Although it's the really, I think it's is the one in which I invested the most time and theoretical creativity, of theoretical innovation, I guess. So in the second part, I say, well, okay, this is the contrast between Europe, and this is just a preview. I won't talk about this unless you raise the topic in the Q&A. So this is world-led strong, trade-led weak. Europe is world-led, Latin America is trade-led. This is a big contrast between two continents, systematic, not ad hoc, because it's based on systematic initial conditions. Then the second part of the book, which is like 300 pages, I talk about specific paths within the trade-led model. I talk about specific paths of trade-led state formation, and that has to do with the fact that, well, in world-led, there's always one actor who does the state formation, the state building, which is the warrior, essentially, the monarch who is the chief of the army. In Latin America, given that there's no pressure, there's a possible diversity of state formation agents, and there is where I generate I explain variation within Latin America, not between continents, but within Latin America. In terms of the two fundamental things of state formation, which is the size of the territory and the ability or the timing between territory consolidations and violence monopolization, which are the two dimensions of state formation. And here, I'm just very quickly, I distinguish between three subtypes. Port-driven, when the port is driving, or actually the political entrepreneurs in the main port of an emerging country, and when that happens, there's a potential for creating a huge territorial colossus. Lord-driven, which is the caudillos, similar to the warriors of Europe, but are very vegetarian, because these lords, the moment they create their own country, they invest in trade, they stop investing in armies, and this I showed this abundantly I think in chapter 11. And then sometimes state formation is not driven by a port or a lord, it's just driven by a party, and here are the cases. Okay, so Argentina and Brazil are port-driven. I would claim that Chile is also a port-driven case. Lord-driven, Venezuela, Peru, and Guatemala, the secession. These are the cases that I cover in the book. And party-driven, Mexico, Colombia, and Uruguay. What's nice about party-driven is that, well, here the size is usually big of the country. Here the size is usually smaller because it's a secession from something else. The party-driven, I think, well, I don't know, some of the reviewers like Hillel Seufer, he liked this path a lot. And the interesting thing here is that when it's party-driven, it's not that a party creates a state, but it's the competition between two parties that create a national arena, because the parties create networks of support, multi-regional, and the thing that happens here is a separation between territory consolidation, the creation of a political arena, and the monopolization of violence. There's usually a huge gap between territory consolidation and violence monopolization. So that's another decoupling that occurs in this specific path, okay? So I think this is it. Obrigado.
Many thanks, Sebastian. Now the floor is open to questions and observations, both in the chat and raising hands. Rogério may give you the word if you want to make a question yourself, or you can write them down. Well, I can start the questions. People are still organizing themselves. So two observations that came to my mind when I read the book. The first is something that comes from the fact that it's a kind of contradiction or apparent contradiction, because the war-led in the war-led state formation, the role of I'm simplifying a lot the argument to make the question short, but in the war-led state formation path, the role of the military at the end is very small. You were saying that in the process of state building and state formation, in which the war was not central, at the end the military. So explaining the role of the military in Latin America seems to be an important task for you for the next round. And the next thing, also for the next round, is to extract more consequences of these patterns to what comes next, to the consolidation, the starting moments of democracy in the region. Why populism became an important political grammar? Why a certain type of welfare state was produced in Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, similarly with the state, very strong, strong state-led kind of corporatism in all the countries. So I think that I would push you. You mentioned in our conversation, you mentioned that you are working in a continuation of the project. So these two elements seem to me important elements that stay in the mind of the reader. Is well, and then how these things, how these arguments here, which are really eloquent, how they connect with features of the region that we know are central. So we have one question here in the chat already. It's from Professor Davidson Lopes from Federal University of Minas Gerais, and he's at the University of Oxford at the moment. Davidson, do you want to ask, or do you want me to read? Rogério? I think you have.
I think that he has to be allowed to do that. Yeah, there he is.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you very much, Eduardo, for giving me the floor. I'm afraid I won't be able to turn on my camera, so I'm really sorry for this. It's all dark in here, you know, and it's impossible at the moment to make myself seen. But still, I would be happy to make this question by way of actually directly asking Professor Mazzuca, whose book I have read a few months ago. It was a brilliant one. I mean, a great experience to have read this book before coming to the UK. It's been very helpful for me since I have been dedicating myself to the study of one bureaucracy, which is Itamaraty, Brazil's foreign ministry. And I think that your work provides me with a very interesting key to explore the development of Itamaraty over time. You know, Itamaraty is about to become a 200-year-old bureaucracy. It's one of the oldest ones in the history of Brazil's state. And so my question, given that you have delved into 3 cases in Latin America, Mexico, Argentina, and Brazil. I mean, you have also contemplated many other cases, but you have given special focus, attention to these 3 cases. And when comparing the 3 cases, the 3 bureaucracies for the handling of foreign affairs, I can tell that they are at very different levels of development. Itamaraty being by far the most robust bureaucracy. It's become professional in the early 20th century. It's almost 200 years of age, as I have just mentioned. And I mean, it's much better equipped with personnel. So it's hardly comparable, honestly. It's much more insulated from the political game in the country. And you can see that, I mean, just about every posting is based on, I mean, career diplomats will take up just about every ambassadorship. So it's, I mean, it's hardly comparable. And so why would you say this is so? I mean, if I'm right, if my premise is correct, what would have led to such a different outcome in the three countries when it comes to the foreign affairs bureaucracies of the three countries? Because after all, we are speaking of three trade-led state formations at the end of the day. So, I mean, I don't know if it was clear enough, but I mean, this was my question. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Professor Lopez or Belém Lopez?
Lopez would be good. I mean,
Lopez. So you're absolutely wrong. They are not. You say that they are incomparable. No, they are comparable. Everything is comparable so long as you use the same metrics. And the comparison clearly says that Brazil is ages. Itamaraty, there's nothing like Itamaraty. There's nothing in Itamaraty, nowhere in Latin America. That's maybe somewhere in Chile you will find islands of super excellence, of just pure technical, in a way, competence, and really, and it's the oldest, the most competent, is autonomous. Maybe also the Supreme Court in Brazil has effects, is like no other, maybe the Colombian one. So there are what Cardoso and many other people have talked about, like archipelagos of excellence. And there's no question about that. There's no question about that. Zero question about that. Yet, I don't think that really a spot, I mean, if there's a bit of ink in Eduardo's cat, that doesn't make him a tiger, you know. It's just an exception. It's still a cat. The general state in Brazil is very patrimonial. There are islands of excellence, no doubt. And there's no doubt that Brazil has a ton of potential, or has what can I say that you don't know? But I think it's an exception. And then, given that it's an exception, it should be explained maybe as an exception through non-systematic factors, asystematic factors, because it's a deviation from the regression line, essentially. So it's okay. I'm perfectly happy with those things. Those things can happen because, I mean, a map is a map. I provide a map for patrimonialism. I don't expect, you know, to provide a photography or an exact reproduction, one-to-one reproduction of reality. There are deviations, and obviously it has to do with the Braganza tradition. It has to do with the Braganza tradition, how it stays so strong, how much less contested independence war. I mean, there were no civil wars in Brazil, so no, the state was not destroyed by factions in a way, and which is what happened in the rest of Latin America. There was a much smoother transition, even though the West secessionist attempts. There was a much smoother transition. I will still say, however, that in my book, really capacity, especially in the countries that had real states at some point. By some standards, which are Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina, there didn't have states that were strong enough to handle the immensity and the colossal scale that they had. And then, no, even if you have great foreign service, the state will not be evenly present in all the territory. A, because the state is not capable enough. B, because the territory is untractable. And that's the main point. Are there exceptions? There are exceptions. Argentina had a great schooling system for a long time. After a while, it became sort of contaminated with patrimonialism, but there were exceptions to that. And so I'm okay with those exceptions, but I mean, these are still cats. They are not tigers. It's just it's an ink within the fur of the outer skin of a cat, but they're still cats. Then going back to Eduardo's points, he made a point about, well, war led, then the military are small. Actually, these are super. I mean, you look at Scandinavia; they're super democracies, and what's the role of the military in the UK? It's none. Okay, that's exactly right. But that is the point. When you have a ton of state building, you have backlash from society, and society makes bureaucracies become civil. That's the point. When you have a very intense period of state building, there's backlash from society, and you have no taxation without representation, and something more important, no taxation without efficient provision of public goods. So that's the paradox. So in Latin America, given that you don't have that, then the military can be more powerful and do whatever they want, because there's no state really. So it's up for grabs. Extract more and talk about populism. I think I can talk about many things. In the book with Jerry Monk, I talk about the relationship between patrimonial state and low quality democracy. And so I would refer, in order not to bore everyone, and I'm more interested rather than in populism, which is a potential, is always a propensity in weak democracies, and weak democracies are partly caused by patrimonial states, and so you always have the populist temptation everywhere in these countries. I am interested more in the prospects of economic development, because as some of you might know, I'm also an economist. So now I'm interested in the economic consequences of these states, which on the one hand are patrimonial, and on the other they are filled with Dutch disease. Their territories are so unwieldy that they are filled with Dutch disease. So that's a development trap. I'm more interested in the economic consequences. Yeah. Okay. So okay. Next.
Sorry, Sandra, do you want to?
Oh, this is an excellent question, Adrian.
Okay.
Okay, this is okay. Sandra,
yeah, we have one question by Sandra.
Okay,
it's very short, so maybe I should read it. Fascinating presentation. One question: how would you classify the USA in this classification? And then you have the Adrian's question, and then there's Sergio's question that I have to.
I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. I did not follow the order because I was not paying attention to. Yeah. Okay.
That's my fault.
So
I was the one who.
So yes. So the U.S. Given the pandemics, I had a research agenda that was studying subnational bureaucracies in Brazil and Argentina. I had to suspend that. I had already started with Argentina, but I couldn't do the rest for economic development. I was trying to, okay. So I moved to the US because everyone is asking me about the US, and I had thought a lot, and I had a draft of a chapter on the US, but that now suddenly became so big that my actual project, my current project, is on the US. And let me summarize what the argument of my book is, the book that I'm working on, which is also going to be a little bit long, but is that it is a latecomer process, so it looks Latin American with a pioneer outcome. And how is that? Why is that? I've written already a little bit about this. And so the US is an incredible case, but not an exceptional case, because the US think of themselves as exceptional, and then we would be having another ideographic explanation, like Africa is different, the US is different, Latin America. Okay, so in terms of the international conditions, what are they? Well, there's trade. Trade is very important in the US state formation. It's very important. So one can say that it's trade-led state formation, right? So trade is very important in the US. There are elements of trade-led state formation everywhere in the US. The US wants free trade, wants to essentially get rid of British mercantilism, and that's one big reason for independence. On the other hand, if you look at the geopolitical dimension, the other dimension in the typology of international conditions, what's the big difference between the US independence and Latin American independence? Latin American independence occurred vis-a-vis declining empires. They were already knocked out in a way. Napoleon had invaded in 1807. These were very, especially Spanish America, it was a very weak ground. As opposed to the US had to fight with the emerging leading power, and it created military capacity. And actually the process of independence in the US started with the 7 Years' War, right? In the 1750s. They were already, France, the US, and Britain were already competing for territory in North America. And you only have in the Americas, in all the Americas, you really have 4 major armies: the Brazilian army, the San Martin army, the Bolivar army, and the Washington army, right? Only 2 did not create. The San Martin and the Bolivar army, it was so improvised. There was such lack of profession that they were not able to create a country. Those armies were not able to create a country. Washington not only created a country, but he became president, and there was no caudillo coming out from. There was no rural warlord coming out from American independence. It was a very cohesive army. Yet it was trade-led because there was fundamentally a big deal that the US made in its formation, which is the North and the South, which is essentially, if you look at it, is something, the North is something like a confederation of, let's say, Belgium, the Netherlands, and the UK, and England. And then the South of the US is essentially Brazilian Northeast. So you have this very latecomer process in which there is a pact of non-transformation of the periphery by the center, and that's the Southern slavery. So that's very latecomer. But since that there's a rudiment of capacity in the North, you have there a country that's creating a critical juncture that combines 2 regions that are almost incompatible. And then the North is formed with a ton of initial state capacity. The subnational capacity of the North is equivalent to that of the capacity of any European country. So if you look at the state of Massachusetts, or you look at Philadelphia, or you look at Baltimore, or you look at Rhode Island, they are highly capable subnational states. And when the moment comes of deciding who is going to have the power to conquer the west frontier, to move from the coast to the interior, whether it's going to be the South or the North prevails in a very European fashion in a way. Okay, so that's the answer to the question of the US.
Okay, we have several questions. The first one was Sergio's question that I didn't read. It was my fault. It's 2 questions in Portuguese, so I'm going to more than translate them. I'm going to summarize because they are quite long. So the first one is from your theory of state formation and construction. What are the connection? He asks you to stress a little bit more the connections between the colonization and the characters of the elites, of the local elites. And the second one is why the type of colonization this type of colonization that we had in Brazil, in Latin America, led to an inefficient model of taxation.
Okay, so first things first, Sergio, I'm not going to give an answer that you will like, because it's not going to be complete, or of course it cannot be complete because it's a huge issue. It's a very interesting question. My point, if there's a take-home message from my book, right? In a way, I fight a number of schools there. I don't like dependency theory. Yeah, I just don't. I think that foreign trade was good for Latin America. That if you eliminate foreign trade and foreign investments, we would be much worse. That's one thing. I'm a Bavarian in a way, a non-Marxist in a way, even though after decades of being a Marxist. But in a way, I just that. The other thing that I don't like is this idea of colonial origins of everything. So we are doomed because of colonial origins. My point here is that the 19th century was a century of massive transformation. The slowest one was, of course, in Brazil. But you look everywhere, and the independence revolutions were true revolutions. They eliminated slavery. They eliminated mercantilism. They went for free trade. They changed the territory. So the idea that there's a colonial to me is much more important, the legacy of the state formation period than of the colonization period. That is the main message I want to make. Not for everything, not for economic development, for culture, for inequality, for state capacity. For state capacity, the critical juncture was not colonialism, was state formation. That is, I don't care what happened before 1845. Okay, that is the exaggeration. That is the message that if we are in a ring and fighting, I will go with it. If we are collaborative and we just try to figure out what the truth is, of course, the pattern of colonization shaped at the very least the quality of the elites. At the very least. So and from there on, so there's a ton of antecedent conditions, or many of the initial conditions in the state formation period in Latin America were shaped by a colonial legacy. So I would agree with that. But even agreeing with that, I would say still, state formation is a critical juncture. There was a chance to do something good, and there was tons of change.
The second question was about taxation, the connection with taxation.
I don't know. I don't have a good answer to that, so I have to skip that. I mean, it was such an opportunity. I mean, it was such an obvious source of revenue, the tariffs and the custom house. That why would you develop a real taxation, a European style of taxation, when you have that easy source of revenue? It's like for Venezuela asking why are you a rentier state? Well, I have this ton of oil here. What am I going to do? Arabia Saudita, what are you going to do? We have this stream of income that's almost like manna from heaven. That's what explains the inefficiency. It's indirect commerce taxing to imports. That was optimal at the time, even though it was timing consistent. But who cares about the future at the time? Okay.
We have 4 questions, and now the questions are arriving fast. So maybe we could do 2 at a time. The first one is Adrian's question.
Yes.
How does the argument of trade-led state formation connects with labor incorporation and Collier's argument about the consequences of the critical juncture?
So I like this. The reason why I like this question is because when I answer your question, Eduardo, about populism, right, about more recent legacies or current events, right? I didn't take so let me, if I were to really criticize the argument of my book, say, okay, you're explaining an outcome in 1870 but after from 1870 to 2023, so many things happened. So coronelismo, Estado Novo, dictatorship, democratization, neoliberal reform. Come on, man! This. What are you doing? This is too much. Okay, and I think that is what happened with labor incorporation. I mean, there was all these varieties, these diverse forms of labor incorporation. Although I very much agree with Eduardo's point that essentially everything was corporatism. A populist form of I like that very much. It's a simplification, but it's a very valuable one. So given all that happened during the 20th century, isn't it crazy to say the 19th century is with us? Isn't it crazy? I would say no. It's not crazy because if you look at the territories, they remain extraordinarily stable as compared to any other region. But then if the territory remains stable, right? Many of the fundamental parameters of politics remain stable. The demographics move slowly, so the potential coalitions that you can make are there. I mean, they move. They're slow moving, right? Mm-hmm. The center of power, the territorial division of power, they move slowly. So 19th century state formation set some fundamental parameters that are very slow moving after the fact. So that's one thing. The other thing is that, well, many things happen. Okay, many things happen, but could we simplify those things that happened a little bit? And what happened after state formation? Well, the big thing that happened after state formation is the creation of mass politics. And then you have, of course, globalization, which involves some potentially a second critical juncture in which labor incorporation was too generous for being globally competitive. But that is essentially the thing. So one could say, well, okay, you have the state formation critical juncture. What are the other critical junctures? In order to take a shortcut, what are the other critical junctures? And that's why I like Sergio's questions so much, and we just point to the same argument as Eduardo. Well, what happens with mass politics? And so, yeah, I don't know what happens. Mass politics is a new critical juncture, possibly. I don't know many things can happen. But the thing is this, right? The thing is that mass politics in Brazil, in Argentina, in Mexico, look similar in many ways. And they look similar in the sense that they attract labor from the peripheries to the industrial centers. That creates the favelas or the villas. So that was sort of already in the script. It was going to happen. It was going to happen. The sector with industrial power was going to become an industrial metropolis, and with all the poverty ring. Then the peripheries were going to be low maintenance political units, essentially subnational despotisms or conservative bastions. They were going to be that all the time. And then you form parties based on that. That's what you do. You form parties based on long rankings of poor people and now extra poor people. And then you may deal with governors. And that is essentially Argentine, Brazilian, and Mexican politics. I mean, I think that after, I mean, it shaped a lot. The territory was a real fundamental parameter for labor incorporation. And you can see that actually labor incorporation should be distinguished according to whether there's a peripheral component to it or not, whether there was mass migration from peripheries to centers and so on and so forth. And that would be a new perspective on labor incorporation, which I think becomes less relevant once you have the political arena demarcated. This is not shaping the political. State formation is not just shaping the political arena, it's creating the political arena.
Then we have Marcelea's question, which goes to the present moment.
Yes.
Asking you to discuss a little bit which type of war-driven is more vulnerable to democratic backsliding.
Yes. Wow, what a phenomenal question. I have no idea. I have to answer to that. I have no idea. I really have no idea. I think I have no idea. I will have to sort of look back at the typology. I made a typology in the second part of states of countries with subnational economies, subnational regions like maybe Rio de Janeiro, the Paraíba Valley or the Pampas, that are dynamic and then create a middle class potentially, and they are less vulnerable to caudillo type of rule, or because all caudillos in Latin America, they depend a lot on having a periphery, a backward periphery in a way, politically and economically backward. If you don't have that, you don't have that much backsliding. So I really don't have an answer, but I think obviously my book is not going to explain, obviously, let's say it's obvious that it's not going to explain backsliding 100 the R square of the correlation between state formation and backsliding is going to be very far from 1. And I would say it's very close to 5%, or if at all. So, but if I start thinking about territories, about legacies of regions that were completely dominated by rural lords, like Peru or Central America or Venezuela, and then regions with peripheries that are very backward, I would say those are the regions that are in danger. In my book, I say why Chile and Uruguay are sort of invulnerable to backsliding in my book, and those were half port driven, half party driven. When I do it in detail. So which do not backslide? Those who transform the periphery or those who do not have peripheries, and that's Chile, Uruguay, and Costa Rica. Costa Rica is now a test because there's uncertainty in Costa Rica, but in the book I deal with those 3 exceptions for capacity. So those states that have capacity have less risk of backsliding. Okay.
Okay, we still have 2.
Okay.
Vicente Ferraro asks if Brazil is not a mixed model because of the flee of the Portuguese crown during the Napoleon Wars to Rio, and then he asks you to please specify more the concept of periphery incorporation. And if I can, maybe we can join the 2 questions.
Yes.
Also, the last question by Anna. Some wars in Latin America, like the Ecuadorian Peruvian War or the Chaco War, was strongly related to territorial disputes and resource exploration. How your theory would accommodate the escalation of these wars in Latin America, and how these elements are associated to trade itself?
Oh, super interesting question, guys. I wish I had an hour more, and I wish it weren't 11 p.m. in Lisbon. So the transfer of the Brazilian bureaucracy to Latin America. Yes, that is Itamaraty in a way. You have there the explanation of Itamaraty in a way. And also a very decent navy and a very decent army in many ways, and a very decent elite. Okay, for state building, not for other purposes, for state building. I'm not talking about social equality here. Just I'm for the outcome that I'm talking about, not for other outcomes. Okay. So yeah, the transfer, but look at the transfer. The transfer was the transfer of a defeated, of a declining, decadent crown. It was okay. So well, if you come here, if you go there to Brazil, okay. If you go from Lisbon to Brazil, maybe looks great, but it's still very, very. It's hyper patrimonial actually. The Brazilian bureaucracy. So it's not a real bureaucracy. So yeah, there was transfer, it's mixed, there were some geopolitical considerations, but not that much. And this in a way relates to the other question. I will try to leave peripheral incorporation for the end. But so the other question is about, well, there were some wars. There was the Chaco War, the Paraguayan War, in which Brazil intervened, but those were exceptions. Those were battles in a way. Europe is in constant war. It's in constant war. You have the Habsburg Empire, a non-territorial entity alive still in the 20th century, right? Fighting other modern states. Non-territorial entities fight. So state formation in Europe through war is a sustained process of 4 centuries. In Latin America, you have battles. And some crazy guy decides that this territory becomes interesting. I will try to grab it and become famous or important or who knows what. And so there are crazy guys making bets. You have Bolsonaro's. I mean, there's chance of Trump's everywhere. Okay, so fine. So the war is not. If you compare, it's not a constant. It's really not a nothing. There's nothing like the constant pressure that you see in Europe. Okay. Specify the concept of peripheral incorporation. You if that means that, what do I mean by it? It's a very good question, because in Europe, essentially, is the conquest of the center, of the monarch, actually the property of the monarch. He has his castle, and the land is the outer ring of that. Incorporate that because there's more resources there. There's money and there's men for the battlefield. So so what does it do? There's conquest. There's conquest of that. So that's peripheral incorporation. So essentially, peripheral incorporation is the territorial merging of a center, of a region that becomes more central than the rest that's being merged with. That's the concept of peripheral incorporation. Actually, it's territorial merger, but since every territorial merger has an internal hierarchy, some part of that merger can be called center and the rest can be called periphery. So that's it. In Europe, that happened mostly by conquest. In Latin America, that happened by agreement. There was no that much conquest, just you go invade and transform, and you send your intendant and you transform the thing. You make deal with the local notables. And so so there was territorial consolidation through deal making. Why is this good that we are together in the same country? Why is this good? So in a way, that's an anticipation of the European Union, if you think about it, because that's merging by agreement, right? No more conquest. Okay, what else? Are we happy?
I think you did them all.
Wow.
That was the last one.
Okay. Okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I know you must be very tired because it's late in Portugal.
I'm not that tired. It's late, but I'm on holiday, so I'm not that tired.
No, but then on holidays we get more tired. That's the idea of holidays.
Yeah.
More tired.
Yeah, you're right. But yes, you're right. But I took my vacation after pandemics, after writing, after lots of work. I took my holiday seriously. The only exception is this talk.
Okay, that's even better for us. So I really want to thank you for this wonderful lecture and discussion in the name of the department and of the center. And we continue in touch.
I'm incredibly happy to have been part of this seminar series that you have. And actually, I would say flattered by the quality of the questions. The questions usually don't flatter the speaker, but the quality of the questions really flatter me, because they help me think, and they show engagement and a super high level of intellectual capacity and creativity. So when you speak remote, you speak blindly about the audience. Then you see the questions, and you see that they were there. They were there thinking faster than I was. So I'm very happy.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, Eduardo, Rogerio, those are the proper names that I know. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sebastian.
Everyone. Hope to see you again soon.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.